Imagine a quiet, picturesque town hidden deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Northern California. A place where families live in peace, where the air smells of pine trees and fresh mountain breeze, and where time seems to slow down. This was Keddie, a serene and isolated community that seemed as far removed from the horrors of the world as one could get. But one night in 1981, that tranquility was shattered forever. Cabin 28, tucked in a quiet corner of this mountain paradise, would become the site of one of the most horrific and perplexing murders in the history of California. A family of 4 hoping for a fresh start would be torn apart by a brutal killer whose identity remains a mystery. A crime so vile, so unexplainable, it has baffled investigators for over 40 years. A case with so many layers, so many questions, and so few answers. Tonight, we dive deep into the chilling tale of the Keddie Cabin Murders. What happened that night? Why was a small, seemingly peaceful family torn apart? And why, after all these years, does the killer remain free? The year was 1981, and 36-year-old Sheila Sharp was starting over. A mother of 5, she had fled an abusive relationship and moved to Keddie to build a new life for herself and her children. Sue was a resilient woman, determined to provide a better future for her kids. She moved into a modest cabin with her 3 youngest children, 15-year-old John, 12-year-old Sheila, and 10-year-old Tina. Sue's 2 older children, 20-year-old John Jr. and 19-year-old Dana, lived elsewhere. The family had hopes of finally finding peace in this remote town. Cabin 28, located in a small cul-de-sac just outside the main part of Keddie, was perfect for them. It was isolated enough to feel like a retreat, but close enough to the town for convenience. However, that peace would soon turn to terror. On the evening of April 11, 1981, Sue's boyfriend, 37-year-old Jimmy Haggett, came to visit. The couple spent the evening together, and everything seemed normal. The children, as was their routine, went out for the evening to visit friends nearby. But little Tina stayed home. She was about to become an unwilling witness to a night of terror that would tear her family apart. Later that night, Sheila, the oldest daughter, returned home. What she found when she opened the door to Cabin 28 was nothing short of a nightmare. The house was eerily quiet, and when she called out for her mother and siblings, there was no reply. Sheila's heart began to race. She ventured deeper inside, and there, in the dim light of the cabin, she discovered the unimaginable. What Sheila found inside the cabin was beyond her worst fears. The bodies of Glenna, John, and Tina were scattered across the rooms of the cabin in a grisly scene. Their brutalized, lifeless bodies told a horrific story. The murderers had left their marks, not just physical, but psychological. It was clear from the moment the authorities arrived that this was not a random act of violence. Glenna, the mother, had been viciously bludgeoned with a hammer. Her body was tied up, and it was clear she had fought for her life. Her son, John, had been stabbed multiple times, but it was Tina's death that left investigators reeling. Her body was found in a particularly disturbing position, away from the others. She had been viciously attacked, and it seemed as though she had been the intended final victim, perhaps even the one the killer had planned to torment the most. What made the crime even more chilling was the absence of forced entry. No windows had been broken, no doors kicked in. This indicated the killer, or killers, were someone who either knew the family or had a certain degree of access to the home. Whoever committed this crime had to have been familiar with the layout of the house and the family's routines. Despite the horror of what was found inside the cabin, one chilling detail emerged. A 5th person, a 12-year-old friend of the family named Greg, was also present in the house that night. He had managed to escape the carnage, but his survival raised even more questions. Who could have committed such a violent and calculated act? What connection did they have to the family? And why did they leave the scene so carefully staged? As the investigators arrived, the first questions started to surface. Who would want to kill this family? Was it a random stranger, or did the killer have a personal vendetta? The crime scene raised more questions than answers. The brutality of the killing suggested something far more deliberate than a random act of violence. The fact that nothing appeared to have been stolen from the cabin was another unsettling detail. It seemed as though the killer had come for a specific purpose: murder. In the early days of the investigation, there were several theories. Some speculated that it was a random act of violence. But as detectives began to probe deeper, a more disturbing theory emerged. Was it someone close to the family? Could the killer have been someone Sue knew? Was it a man who might have held a personal grudge, or perhaps a person who had been involved in the family's troubled past? One of the first suspects was Sue's estranged ex-husband, who had a history of violence. However, there was no evidence to directly link him to the crime. Another possibility was a man named Marty, who had been seen near the cabin shortly before the murders. But once again, the evidence remained circumstantial. As the investigation continued, disturbing details started to surface about the possible involvement of multiple people. The brutality of the killings indicated a certain level of coordination. Could this have been the work of more than one person? And why, after all these years, does the case remain unsolved? As months turned into years, the investigation hit numerous dead ends. No suspects were ever officially charged, and no new evidence came to light. And yet, the whispers continued. Rumors persisted that someone in the town knew more than they were letting on. 2 children survived the horrific attack that night: Sheila, the oldest daughter, and Greg, the young boy who had been spending the night at the cabin. Sheila, who had been outside when the murders occurred, was left to grapple with the shock and trauma of finding her family slaughtered. Greg, who had somehow escaped, was also a key witness to the crime. The surviving children were questioned repeatedly by investigators, but they couldn't provide clear answers. They were terrified, confused, and their memories were clouded by the shock. However, their involvement remained a subject of scrutiny. Has Greg seen something? Was Sheila hiding a vital piece of information? The lingering question remained: could there have been a connection between the survivors and the killers? The theories continued to evolve. There was speculation that the murders had been committed by a group of people who knew the family, or even someone who had been watching the cabin for days, maybe even weeks, before striking. But the case grew colder, and the possibility of the killer being a local resident became a more plausible theory. Over the years, various people were suspected, but there was never enough evidence to make an arrest. And then, in 1984, a new lead surfaced: a suspect named Marty, a local man whose behavior had aroused suspicion. Yet once again, the trail grew cold, and the case remained unsolved. A new lead seemed to point toward Marty, a suspect who had been involved in the case from the beginning. A tip-off had emerged from an anonymous source, and Marty's connection to the killing seemed to grow stronger. But despite bringing him in for questioning, the authorities found nothing solid enough to charge him with the crime. And just like that, the lead evaporated. Marty's involvement was never proven, and the mystery deepened. As the years turned into decades, the Keddie Cabin Murders became an infamous cold case. Theories ran wild, from the involvement of local residents to the possibility that the killers were strangers who had targeted the family at random. But one thing remained the same: no one knew the full truth. The Keddie Cabin Murders remain one of the most chilling unsolved cases in the history of California. A horrific crime that ripped a family apart and left the town in a state of uneasy fear. Despite numerous leads, the killer or killers remain unidentified. The case has become a dark, unresolved chapter in California's history, and the people of Keddie are still left wondering who is responsible for this brutal act of violence, and why did they never face justice? Cabin 28 still stands today, abandoned and decaying in the forests of Keddie, a silent witness to the horror that unfolded within its walls. The mystery of the Keddie Cabin Murders continues to haunt the small town, a reminder that some questions may never have answers. After more than 40 years, the case remains unsolved. The families of the victims and the people of Keddie are left with nothing but questions. Was the killer someone close to the family, a stranger, or perhaps someone who had watched the family for longer than anyone could imagine? Drop your theories in the comments. Do you think the case will ever be solved? If you love chilling true crime stories like this one, hit that subscribe button, because some mysteries will never die.